with the parable of the Good Samaritan today and with all other parables. The bottom line really is not what happened in Palestine about 1980 years ago, although that's important. The bottom line is you and I, and what God is doing for us, with us, and how we are responding today on July 10th, 2010. And like always, you and I need to put ourselves into the middle of the story, middle of the Scriptures, although the story is bigger than the Scriptures. And then we just let God take over. And we do need to respond to God. Now, the parables very well, I'm not going to walk through it, but just a couple points to get us started. Both the priest and the Levite, we may wonder why they didn't go. Well, there was a ritual law of impurity. Now, don't think of Sixth Commandment here. It was a kind of impurity if they would touch someone who is dead or seriously bleeding. It would render them ritually impure, and they could not take part in the temple or synagogue service until they went through some process of purification. So they had to struggle with, okay, do I go and help this person who was robbed, in which case I will suffer this ritual impurity, or do I go by and hope somebody else will do it? That's their story. They walked by. The Samaritan is the enemy. He was in foreign territory. Jesus had just come from Samaria, so it's even more interesting that he chose a Samaritan. He is the one who came and showed mercy. Now, I'm going to read some more into this interpretation. Just as you and I, just as you could also, it'd be great to have a discussion about this later. If anybody wants to, that'd be fine. And I'm going to do it with the help of Sister Barbara Reed, who teaches at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. And she also writes in America magazine each week about the Scriptures. And we need to really use our imaginations in putting ourselves there. Now, the presumption that she's starting on is that this scholar of the law would be the type of person who hated the Samaritans. And for him, it just doesn't make sense that Jesus would have picked a Samaritan of all people. Question for us. If Osama bin Laden was the person lying at the side of the road, we knew it was him, would we go and help and bind up his wounds and take him to the hospital? Or, more at home, if an immigrant from Mexico was laying on the side of Claremont Avenue, we don't know why, and all kinds of cars were passing by, would we stop to help? Or not? You can think of some more examples. Now, taking this a step further, this scholar of the law, this man, who was out to test Jesus, but Jesus is really testing him, he knows what's right up here. But he doesn't necessarily know down here in his heart. His heart appears not quite ready yet. Or maybe his heart knows, but he's not quite open to take the message from his heart and act on it. Now let's reverse the story. Let's put the scholar of the law down in the ditch. Or let's put you or me down in the ditch. And we've just been seriously beat up. And this priest and Levite walk by, or in our case, with a little imagination, maybe one of our relatives or friends drive by. They're in a hurry. They got to get somewhere. We recognize them. We're down in the ditch dying. How do we feel? Now, if the Samaritan, that enemy, had approached the scholar of the law lying down in the ditch, even though he was badly wounded, would he have said to the Samaritan, "Go get out of here, I can't stand you"? Or would he have accepted his help? Maybe he would have opened his heart to the Samaritan. Maybe not. If he would have opened his heart to the Samaritan, maybe he would also be opening his heart even more to God's grace. Because it's pretty clear that his heart is only a little ways open to God's grace. Otherwise, he wouldn't be trying to test Jesus. How open is my heart? And how afraid am I to open it even further? Because the word might take me. Staying with Sister Barbara Reed and using her imagination and ours with this parable, the scholar of the law was doing some rationalizing, as do you and I from time to time. At least I do. Jesus is telling us what it means to be a loving person. Loving that person down in the ditch and responding to God's love. Now the parable ends, like many parables, open-ended. We don't know exactly what happened next. And frankly, it's not important. What's important is what happens to each of us next. Because that parable is primarily addressed to ourselves today on July 10th, 2010. Am I able to really listen to it? Am I able to really listen to the rest of the scriptures? Am I able to really listen to God speaking through all the events of today? And then respond to God deep in my heart? Because God works through all those events, and particularly through this parable. How is this story going to end? Not back in Israel 1980 years ago. How is it going to end for you and for me? Talk about that on your way home. Talk about it in the gathering room. Amen.